Hello, everyone. For those of you who are in Canada, happy post Victoria Day. So, today, what I want to talk about is a study that was published by Deloitte recently. And the study talks about how basically corporate structures are entering a boundaryless world where work is no longer defined by rigid traditional job descriptions, and how the data reveals that 94% of enterprise executives say fluid leadership capability is critical to organizational success. Yet, only 23% believe their current leaders are actually equipped to manage outcomes in a boundaryless environment. So let's talk about that because I hear that a lot when it comes to executives looking for their next career move. In fact, this is partly why it is so difficult for a lot of leaders to decide what their next move is and what role they want to target. It is often why I find leaders who come to me saying that they're jack of all trades, they've done so much in their career, and they have no idea what to commit to because doing so limits them. I don't know about you, but I've been in a lot of jobs in the corporate world where I wasn't necessarily doing what my job description initially said when I first started. And when you find yourself in that position and you find yourself doing a role against a title that's not reflective of everything that you brought to the table, it can be very difficult to translate that outside of your organization. This is why people tell me, well, how do I know what role to target? Do you actually have information on every single role out there and what the titles are? Absolutely not. But here's the thing, the approach of branding yourself based on a title is so outdated. It really is outdated. And what you need to do instead of branding yourself based on a title is you want to brand yourself against your unique approach. So let me tell you a story of one of my clients, recent win actually. He has done so much in his career. He's worn so many hats as a leader. He has scaled organizations, he has scaled products, he has built partnerships with external organizations. He wore that customer success hat. He worked the product hat. He wore the program management hat. He built teams. He helped teams, collaborate effectively. And so it was difficult for him to commit to a particular direction. Now, what we ended up landing on is a director of product role. However, even when you market yourself based on a title like a director of product, there are so many flavors of directors of products. There are directors of products who are strong at the development and the technical aspect. They're great at innovating when it comes to features. They're great at rallying the development team and dealing with all of the technical issues. There are directors of products who are better at the market research and understanding customers. They're more on the business side. There are directors of products who are great at sales. And while technically, those historically may not be textbook, director of product roles, you often find yourself in organizations coming in with a specific title, but depending on that company's needs, depending on who your counterparts are cross-functionally, you might end up complementing them in different areas, right? Like I will tell you that when I worked in my role as a product leader at Slalom, I often found myself with very strong solution architects. They really were great at architecting the solution, at understanding the technical constraints. So, how I complemented them was bringing in my systems thinking and understanding the customer very well. And so, I often found myself in product roles where I was the expert in running discoveries and shaping the roadmap. But maybe in another organization, you might not have a very technical counterpart. So you kind of play that role as a director of product, right? So that's the thing. Job descriptions are very static. They are poorly written. They're copied and pasted from some other generic, job posting because the hiring manager wants to hire fast and often is not heavily involved in the hiring process. And sometimes an organization is not very clear about who they need and what problems they need to solve. And so you as a leader, you bring in that experience of having been on so many product teams or so many, if we're talking outside of product, so many, other teams, right? And you realize based on your experience that these are the type of mistakes that companies make based on their environment. And so often what I get my clients to do is to actually create their own job posting. But that is tricky when you are not aware of what differentiates you. And so the key here when it comes to branding is to not fixate on title because titles are different across organizations. I mean, when I was playing a product role, my title was solution owner. Yes, the copying and pasting of job descriptions. Oh my goodness. It is honestly ridiculous. Companies don't put a lot of thought into actually articulating what they need. But I have a lot of sympathy for them because sometimes when you are inside the problem, it really is very difficult to articulate it. In many ways, when you are applying for a job, you want to think of your company as a customer. And we all know that customers are terrible at actually describing what they need. What was Ford's saying? Does anyone know the quote? If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. That's a quote from Henry Ford. And so the thing is, customers often do not know what they want and what they need. And in this case, when you're applying for a role, your customer is actually the organization. They are inside the problem and they're not able to articulate who they need and what they need from that person to solve it. So this is why when I work with clients, the first thing that we need to do when it comes to your sweet spot and your positioning is you need to move away from applying to static titles and you need to start pitching a unified story of how you manage these fluid corporate outcomes. You brand yourself against the types of problems that you solve, and you brand yourself against the outcomes that you've created. and you brand yourself against your unique approach, what do you bring to the table on your initiatives, on your projects, on products that you worked on that are very different than anyone else? Your unique idea of how you solve the problem and what outcomes that you've created across organizations. I hope that that makes sense. So, going back to the example of a client that I recently helped, and he landed a director of product role, one of the things that he brought to the table was he partnered with a VP to create an ecosystem strategy for a global partner. And he basically oversaw a distributed organization of 30 direct reports and more than 70 cross-functional team members across the Americas, Europe, Asia. And he grew the revenue from 600 million to 1.2 billion. Now, I've worked with this client closely. I know him personally, and I can tell you guys that one of his superpowers is he is such an amazing relationship builder. This is why he was able to scale the organization. This is why he was able to form these alliances. He just has a knack of building relationships. And when it comes to scaling a product and scaling an organization, that is an important superpower to have. Okay? He didn't need to be technically strong in order to solve the problem. A lot of the organizations that he was coming into, a big issue they had that was not being able to scale. So that's the thing. We told a lot of these stories in order for us to differentiate him. Another story was that he aligned more than 150 cross-functional stakeholders across engineering, sales, services, and executive leadership to secure a $50 million multi-year contract by identifying the customer pain points. Again, what was his approach? Relationship building. Obviously, I can't go into like the granular details of the story because my client's information is confidential, but that just gives you an idea that what differentiated him and got him the offer was not the title, because there's like thousands of directors of product. Why would they pick him over someone else? Because of how he was able to tell a unified story. Now, what do I mean by unified story? Here's the problem. When a lot of leaders try to tell their story, and by the way, it really grinds my gears when some career coaches talk about how they help people tell their story, because because writing a resume is not telling your story. Like putting a bunch of bullets with like numbers and metrics is not telling your story. Okay. There's an art and science when it comes to telling your story. What makes a story a story is when you start seeing a pattern. And so we have to figure out what pattern is the reoccurring pattern that's consistent across all of your roles, so that hiring managers and recruiters get it. They get it. This is your strength. I see it repeated over and over and over and over again. Now, if we have a whole bunch of disconnected strengths, it becomes confusing what your niche is. If I portrayed this client as an example, as someone who is technically strong and also a relationship builder and also, some other thing, right? the recruiter is going to get confused. And this is where they're going to say to you, well, I don't know what role you want, and I don't know where to place you. But with this client, we found a recurring theme. I was able to help him connect the dots. So every single story that is on his LinkedIn profile, that's on his resume, gives the recruiter the same takeaway, which is this guy's a great relationship builder, and he has a track record of scaling products by increasing the revenue. Every single thing in his profile supports that main idea. One role talks about how he partnered with the VP, worked with distributed teams, and grew the revenue from 600 million to 1.2 billion by redesigning the partner ecosystem, relationship building. Another story in another role talks about how he defined and executed the product strategy for a multi-vendor platform and how he aligned 150 plus cross-functional stakeholders in order to secure 50 million. Another role talks about how he directed product and operational strategy across 100 million plus portfolio, building systems while scaling the operating group from 8,500 to 13,000 professionals. Again, how? Through relationship building. That's the thing. When we figure out your niche and your sweet spot, the title no longer matters. The problem you solve becomes clear. The approach that's so unique to you, that's aligned with who you are as a professional and your identity, becomes clear. And so organizations don't care about your title because title doesn't guarantee that you're going to create any outcomes or results. They want proof of success. And a lot of people have trouble talking about the proof of success because sometimes it's fabricated. Sometimes, like a coach or a resume writer who sits down with you, it tells you to just fudge it and just spit out numbers and doesn't help you go back, relive what you've done, and connect the dots and share it in a way that is smart so that an organization self-identifies with the organization that you've helped. Again, storytelling is not about spitting out numbers and metrics. A story has characters. It has an enemy. Maybe your enemy was difficult stakeholders, misaligned stakeholders, a merger and acquisition, right? Maybe that was your enemy at the time that was, keeping you from creating that result or creating that friction in the organization, and you were able to overcome that enemy. A story has characters. It's not just you executing. There are characters that you interacted with in order to deliver those results, right? And so some of the mistakes that I see when directors try to tell their story, you come across like you were the only one in the organization. And because you're so fixated on bragging about what you've done, because that's what you've been taught by people out there, talk about the metrics, talk about the wins. Yeah, but spitting out metrics without talking about how that happened, because, when you watch a movie and you hear a story, you don't just see the ending. The story with just an ending is not a story. There has to be a beginning, middle, and end. There has to be a story makes it an interesting story has conflict. And so when you're not sharing that, it's really hard for an organization to want to take a leap of faith on you. And so I invite you all to change your approach of being fixated over titles, of thinking that just because you said you were a director of XYZ, now the organization is going to know what outcome you deliver. Throw all of that away. That's like the old way of doing things. And those are tactics that people at the entry level follow. You're not entry level anymore. You're not even mid level. You're at the director level. You can't rely on someone else defining what you do. You need to be the one who's able to articulate that. And you need to stop using labels as a crutch and start getting clear on the unified story across your career. By being clear on the business problems that you've consistently solved and your value proposition. In my client's case, his value proposition was that he's a relationship builder. But guess what? He didn't know that before working with me, because sometimes when we are in the land of work, where we're busy, delivering things and leading, we get lost in the fog of what we've been doing. We haven't taken a step back in our career, and we're not able to connect those dots ourselves because we are inside the jar trying to look at the label from the inside. It's very hard to do that. And this is why you need someone to declutter the mess of your career and organize it for you so that you can see the recurring theme and be able to create stories that emphasize that single theme, not 10 or 100 themes, but the consistent theme that ends up being your strength and your value proposition. So a lot of my clients have nonlinear careers. And the reason that they're able to still land roles that are quite reputable at the director VP level, despite having perceived disadvantages like never having the title, not having a network, not knowing anyone, is because they have a very strong narrative, a cohesive brand, a strong, unified story. That is why. Now, if you're finding yourself in this situation where that is an issue for you and you don't know how to solve it, then I recommend booking the career diagnosis with me. So how do you do that? Well, you can go to my website, nadabuhendi.com, or if you go to my LinkedIn profile, and you click on the book an appointment button. So let me quickly show you here. We'll share my screen. So if you go under book an appointment, right underneath my name, you can book your career diagnosis. Just click on this button. It takes 2 minutes to basically fill out this intake form for me to understand your goals and what's blocking you. And then we can have a 15-minute conversation where I help you understand what's blocking you from landing that director role and above. So if you are someone who has more than 15 years of experience, wants to grow your career, move up, whether it is landing a director level role or above, then that is something that I help with and I specialize in. I work with a lot of executives, and the approach is very different. Okay, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your night. If you found this helpful, please give me a like just so that I know that you're listening. And if you know someone in your network who might benefit from this, then I would appreciate it if you repost this so that they can see it as well. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your night. Thank you, Jay, for tuning in. And thank you for anyone who has been listening. Okay. Happy Tuesday.